Story 1. The Anasazi Enigma. In the heart of the American Southwest, a mystery lay buried beneath the sands of time. The Anasazi, a once great civilization that flourished in the canyons and mesas, vanished without a trace over 7 centuries ago. Their disappearance had baffled archaeologists and historians for generations, spawning countless theories and speculations. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could have imagined, and it would take a brilliant and determined anthropologist to unravel the secrets of the ancient ones. Dr. Sofia Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she gently brushed the dirt from the ancient pottery shard. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the excavation site in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, but Sofia barely noticed the heat. Her attention was fully focused on the treasure trove of Anasazi artifacts that lay before her. As one of the world's leading experts on the Anasazi civilization, Sofia had dedicated her life to unraveling the mysteries surrounding their sudden disappearance in the late 13th century. The Anasazi, whose name meant ancient ones in the Navajo language, had built thriving cities and vast trade networks across the Four Corners region of the Southwest. They were master builders, crafting intricate stone structures that rivaled anything found in Europe at the time. But then, seemingly overnight, they vanished. Their great houses and kivas stood empty, their fields and granaries abandoned. No one knew why they left or where they went. Some theories suggested drought, famine, or warfare had driven them away. Others spoke of more esoteric explanations, like a great spiritual journey or even an extraterrestrial intervention. Sofia had never put much stock in the more outlandish theories. She was a scientist, and she believed that the answers to the Anasazi enigma lay in the clues they had left behind, in the pottery, the tools, the rock art, and the very stones of their cities. As she studied the shard in her hand, Sofia felt a familiar thrill run through her. The black-on-white geometric patterns were classic Anasazi, but there was something different about this piece. The design was more intricate than usual, with swirling spirals and strange symbols she had never seen before. Dr. Martinez, come take a look at this. The excited shout came from one of her graduate students, a bright young man named Alex. Sofia hurried over to where he was crouched, examining something in the dirt. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw what he had found. It was a small stone pendant, no bigger than a silver dollar, but it was covered in the same intricate symbols as the pottery shard. The symbols seemed to dance before her eyes, forming patterns that tugged at the edges of her lab. Hoffman was a senior archaeologist and Sofia's mentor, a gruff but brilliant man who had been studying the Anasazi for decades. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, leaning over her shoulder to peer at the scans. Sofia shook her head in frustration. "Nothing that makes sense. These symbols don't match anything in the Anasazi canon. It's like they're from a completely different civilization." Hoffman frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "That's not possible. We've been studying the Anasazi for over a century. If there was another culture living alongside them, we would have found evidence of it by now." Sofia pointed to one of the symbols on the pendant, a complex spiral pattern with a series of dots around the edges. "Look at this. Have you ever seen anything like it before?" Hoffman studied the image for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, I haven't. but that doesn't mean it's from a different culture. It could be a regional variant, or a symbol used by a specific clan or family. We need more context to make any definitive statements. Sophia sighed. She knew Hoffman was right, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the pendant than met the eye. She resolved to keep studying it until she had answers. As the days turned into weeks, Sophia became increasingly consumed by the mystery of the pendant. She spent long hours in the lab, neglecting her other projects and her personal life. Her colleagues began to worry about her, but she brushed off their concerns. She was on the verge of a breakthrough, and nothing else mattered. Late one night, as she was comparing the symbols on the pendant to a star chart, Sophia had a sudden realization. The symbols weren't just random patterns, they were a map of the night sky, to be precise. Each symbol corresponded to a specific constellation or celestial event. And at the center of the map was a date, the summer solstice of 1054 CE, the year of the Crab Nebula supernova. Sophia's heart raced as she cross-referenced the date with the Anasazi archaeological record. She knew that there had been a mass migration of Anasazi people around that time, with entire cities being abandoned overnight. But no one knew why. Could the supernova have been the catalyst? Did the Anasazi see it as a sign from the heavens, a portent of great change? And if so, where did they go? Sophia knew that she needed to investigate further. She started planning a trip to some of the most remote Anasazi sites, places where the archaeological record was scarce but the oral traditions of the local tribes spoke of great mysteries. She had a feeling that the pendant was just the beginning, a tantalizing clue that would lead her to the heart of the Anasazi enigma, and she was willing to risk everything to find the truth. The sun was setting over the red rocks of Chaco Canyon as Sophia made her way back to the campsite. She had spent the day exploring some of the more remote parts of the park, searching for any signs of the Anasazi migration. But so far, she had come up empty. The ancient pueblos and kivas were silent, their secrets locked away in the stone walls and the desert sands. As she approached the campsite, Sophia noticed a strange figure standing at the edge of the firelight. It was an old Navajo man, his weathered face etched with the lines of a life spent under the harsh southwestern sun. Sophia tensed, her hand reaching instinctively for the pepper spray in her backpack. She had heard stories of looters and grave robbers who preyed on archaeological sites, and she wasn't taking any chances. But as she drew closer, she saw that the old man was holding something in his hand. It was a pendant, identical to the one she had found at the dig site. "You are walking a dangerous path," the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The spirits of the Anasazi are restless. They do not take kindly to those who disturb their secrets." Sophia's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady. "And why do you have that pendant?" The old man smiled, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "I am a guardian of the old ways," he said. "The pendant is a sacred object, a key to unlocking the mysteries of the Anasazi. But it is not meant for outsiders." Sophia's mind was racing. She had never heard of Anasazi guardians before, and she was skeptical of any claims of sacred objects or mystical powers. But there was something about the old man that made her pause. "What do you know about the Anasazi disappearance?" she asked carefully. The old man shook his head. "The Anasazi did not disappear," he said. "They ascended. They left this world for a higher plane of existence, one that is beyond the understanding of mortal men." Sophia frowned. She had heard similar theories before, but she had always dismissed them as New Age nonsense. There was no scientific evidence to support the idea of a higher plane of existence, and she wasn't about to start believing in it now. But the old man seemed to sense her skepticism. "You are a woman of science," he said. "But there are things in this world that cannot be explained by science alone." The Anasazi understood this. They knew that there were realms beyond the physical, realms that could only be accessed through the power of the spirit. Sophia shook her head. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe in that kind of thing. I believe in evidence, in facts. And the fact is, we don't know what happened to the Anasazi, but I intend to find out." The old man smiled sadly. "Be careful what you seek," he said. "The truth may be more than you can handle." The Anasazi left this world for a reason. They knew that the balance between the realms was delicate, and that any disturbance could have catastrophic consequences. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't want to admit it, but there was something about the old man's words that rang true. She had always been driven by a thirst for knowledge, a need to uncover the secrets of the past. But what if those secrets were better left buried? She shook off the thought. She was a scientist, and she had a job to do. She couldn't let superstition or fear stand in the way of the truth. "I appreciate your concern," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I can't just walk away from this. I need to know what happened to the Anasazi, and I won't stop until I find out." The old man nodded, as if he had expected her answer. "Very well," he said, "but remember my words. The spirits of the Anasazi are watching, and they will not hesitate to protect their secrets by any means necessary." With that, he turned and walked off into the darkness, leaving Sophia alone with her thoughts and the flickering flames of the campfire. The next morning, Sophia set out for the remote canyons and mesas of the Four Corners region. She had plotted a course based on the star chart from the pendant, hoping that it would lead her to some clue about the Anasazi's final destination. But as she hiked deeper into the wilderness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she found herself jumping at every sound. The rustle of the wind in the sagebrush, the cry of a hawk overhead. She tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, that the old man's warnings had gotten under her skin. But deep down, she knew that there was something more to it. On the third day of her trek, Sophia found herself in a narrow canyon, the walls rising up on either side like the ribs of some great beast. She had been following a faint trail, barely visible beneath the layers of sand and rock, but now it had petered out entirely. She was about to turn back when she noticed something strange. There was a symbol carved into the canyon wall, a spiral pattern with a series of dots around the edges, just like the one on the pendant. Sophia's heart raced as she approached the wall. The symbol was old, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, but it was still clearly visible. And as she looked closer, she saw that there were other symbols too, a whole panel of them, stretching up the canyon wall like a giant petroglyph. She traced her fingers over the symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. Some of them were familiar, constellations and celestial events that she had seen on the pendant, but others were new, strange shapes and patterns that she had never encountered before. And then, as she studied the panel more closely, she noticed something else. There was a small hole in the center of the spiral symbol, a perfect circle that seemed to go deep into the canyon wall. Sophia's hand trembled as she reached into her backpack and pulled out the pendant. She held it up to the hole, and to her amazement, it fit perfectly. There was a soft click, and then the panel began to move. It slid back into the canyon wall, revealing a dark passageway that seemed to descend into the earth itself. Sophia's mind was reeling. She had heard stories of hidden chambers and secret tunnels in Anasazi sites, but she had always dismissed them as myths and legends. But now, standing at the threshold of this ancient portal, she knew that they were real. She took a deep breath and stepped into the passageway. The air was cool and musty, and the only light came from the faint glow of her headlamp. But as she descended deeper into the earth, she saw that the walls were covered in more petroglyphs, intricate designs and symbols that seemed to tell a story. And then, as she rounded a corner, she saw something that made her heart stop. There was a chamber up ahead, a vast cavern that seemed to stretch on forever. And in the center of the chamber was a stone altar, covered in strange artifacts and offerings. But it was what was on the altar that caught Sophia's eye. It was a human skeleton, laid out in a ceremonial pose, its arms crossed over its chest, and around its neck was a pendant, identical to the one that Sophia held in her hand. She approached the altar cautiously, her mind racing with questions. Who was this person? And why had they been buried here, in this secret chamber deep beneath the earth? As she studied the skeleton more closely, she noticed that there was something else on the altar, a small, cylindrical object that looked like a scroll case. She picked it up carefully, her hands trembling as she unrolled the fragile parchment inside. The scroll was covered in the same strange symbols that she had seen on the pendant and the petroglyphs. But as she studied them more closely, she realized that they were not just symbols, they were words. Ancient words, written in a language that she had never seen before. A language that predated the Anasazi by thousands of years. A language that spoke of things that Sophia could barely comprehend. She tried to read the words out loud, her tongue tripping over the unfamiliar syllables. And as she spoke, she felt a strange energy building in the chamber around her. A crackling, electric feeling that made the hair on her arms stand up. And then, with a sudden flash of light and a rush of wind, the chamber began to change. The stone walls wavered and rippled like water, and then they disappeared entirely, revealing a vast, endless expanse of stars and galaxies. Sophia gasped in wonder as she found herself floating in the midst of the cosmos, surrounded by the infinite beauty of the universe. And as she looked around, she saw that she was not alone. There were others there with her, shadowy figures that drifted through the starry void, their forms shifting and changing like wisps of smoke. And as they drew closer, Sophia saw that they were not human, or at least, not entirely human. They had the faces of men and women, but their bodies were made of light and energy, pulsing and swirling in intricate patterns. They spoke in a language that Sophia could not understand, but somehow she knew that they were welcoming her, inviting her to join them in their cosmic dance. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision faded. Sophia found herself back in the chamber, the stone walls solid and unyielding once more. But she knew that what she had seen was real, a glimpse into a realm beyond the physical, a world that the Anasazi had known and understood. She looked down at the pendant in her hand, and she knew that it was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe, to bridging the gap between the mundane and the divine. And as she made her way out of the chamber and back to the surface, Sophia knew that her life would never be the same. She had seen things that few humans had ever witnessed, and she had been given a glimpse of a truth that would change everything. But she also knew that with great knowledge came great responsibility. The Anasazi had left this world for a reason, to protect the balance between the realms. And now, it was up to her to ensure that their secrets remained safe, hidden from those who would seek to abuse them. As she emerged from the canyon and back into the light of day, Sophia knew that her journey was far from over. But she also knew that she was not alone. Story 2. The Forbidden Scroll. In the bustling city of Chang'an, the illustrious capital of the Tang dynasty, a young monk named Jian Yun toiled diligently within the hallowed walls of the Xiangji Temple. Renowned for its vast collection of Buddhist scriptures and the enlightened wisdom of its scholars, the temple was a beacon of knowledge and spirituality in a world oft beset by chaos and strife. Jian Yun, a prodigy in the art of calligraphy, spent his days meticulously transcribing sacred texts with a steady hand and a focused mind. His exceptional skill and unwavering dedication had earned him the respect of his fellow monks, yet beneath his serene exterior lay an insatiable curiosity, a yearning to unravel the mysteries of the universe that extended far beyond the confines of the temple walls. It was on a fateful autumn day, as the crisp breeze carried the scent of persimmon and chrysanthemum through the courtyards, that Jian Yun's life would be forever altered. Tasked with organizing the temple's vast library, an honor bestowed upon only the most trusted of monks, he diligently sorted through ancient tomes and fragile scrolls, each one a treasure trove of knowledge waiting to be unlocked. As he carefully examined a particularly ancient section of the library wall, his keen eyes noticed a loose stone that seemed out of place. Curiosity piqued, Jian Yun gently removed the stone, revealing a hidden compartment that had long been forgotten. Within lay a singular scroll, its parchment yellowed with age and bound with a peculiar silver thread that glimmered in the dusty light. With trembling hands, Jian Yun retrieved the scroll, marveling at the intricate symbols etched upon its surface. The script was unlike any he had encountered before, archaic and cryptic, as if belonging to a language lost to the sands of time. Intrigued, he carefully unrolled the delicate parchment, his heart pounding with anticipation as he began to decipher the enigmatic contents. As his eyes scanned the faded ink, Jian Yun's world began to shift, the boundaries of reality blurring with each revelation. The scroll spoke of an ancient civilization, one that had achieved unimaginable heights of knowledge and power, far surpassing the greatest minds of the Tang dynasty. It whispered of advanced technologies, arcane arts, and a profound understanding of the very fabric of the universe itself. Central to this long-forgotten civilization's legacy was an artifact of immense power known as the Celestial Orb, said to grant its possessor the ability to control the forces of nature, manipulate the threads of fate, and even glimpse into the realms beyond mortal comprehension. The orb was a relic of unparalleled significance. Yet, as Jian Yun delved deeper into the scroll's cryptic passages, he discovered that with great power came an equally great potential for destruction. The scroll recounted the tale of how the ancient civilization had ultimately met its downfall, consumed by the very power they had sought to harness. In their hubris, they had unleashed forces beyond their control, triggering a cataclysm that had wiped their advanced society from the face of the earth, leaving only scattered remnants and whispered legends in its wake. Jian Yun found himself at a crossroads, torn between an overwhelming desire to unravel the secrets of the Celestial Orb and a growing sense of trepidation. He knew that the knowledge contained within the scroll was as dangerous as it was enticing, and that the consequences of its misuse could be catastrophic. Yet, the allure of the unknown, the chance to glimpse into the very essence of creation, proved too powerful to resist. Unbeknownst to Jian Yun, his discovery had not gone unnoticed. In the shadowy corners of the Empire, a nefarious organization known as the Order of the Crimson Phoenix had long been searching for the Celestial Orb, determined to harness its power for their own twisted ends. Led by the ruthless warlord Xiang Fei, a man whose ambition knew no bounds, the Order had infiltrated every echelon of society, from the imperial court to the most remote villages, leaving no stone unturned in their relentless pursuit. Xiang Fei, a master of the dark arts and a cunning strategist, had long ago sacrificed his humanity in exchange for the promise of ultimate power. His soul, twisted by an insatiable hunger for dominion over all living things, was a bottomless abyss that consumed all in its path. With an army of loyal followers at his command and a network of spies that stretched across the empire, he was a formidable foe, one who would stop at nothing to claim the Celestial Orb as his own. As whispers of Jian Yun's discovery reached the ears of Xiang Fei's spies, the warlord set his malevolent plan into motion. In the dark of night, a group of black-clad assassins infiltrated the serene grounds of the Xiangji Temple, their mission clear: to retrieve the forbidden scroll and eliminate any who stood in their way. Chaos erupted within the temple walls as the assassins made their presence known, their blades glinting in the moonlight as they clashed with the temple's guardians. Jian Yun, alerted to the commotion, knew that he had precious little time to act. With the scroll clutched tightly to his chest, he fled into the night, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As he raced through the winding streets of Chang'an, Jian Yun's mind reeled with the weight of the responsibility that now rested upon his shoulders. The forbidden knowledge he carried was a double-edged sword, one that could either enlighten or destroy, and he knew that he must guard it with his very life. The fate of the empire, perhaps even the world, hung in the balance. Guided by the cryptic clues etched within the scroll, Jian Yun embarked on a perilous journey to unravel the secrets of the Celestial Orb and keep its power from falling into the wrong hands. His quest would take him to the farthest reaches of the empire, from the mist-shrouded peaks of Mount Hua to the shimmering waters of West Lake, each step fraught with danger and mystery. Along the way, he encountered an eclectic cast of characters, each with their own motivations and hidden agendas. Among them was Mei Lin, a fierce warrior with a heart as pure as the blade she wielded. Born into a noble family that had fallen from grace, Mei Lin had grown up in the shadow of her father's disgrace, determined to restore honor to her clan's name. When fate brought her into Jian Yun's path, she recognized in him a kindred spirit, a soul burdened by destiny and a thirst for truth. Together, Jian Yun and Mei Lin forged an unbreakable bond as they confronted the challenges that lay ahead. They battled against Xiang Fei's minions, outsmarted cunning rivals, and delved into long-forgotten ruins in search of the fragments of truth that would lead them to the Celestial Orb. With each trial they faced, their resolve grew stronger, their hearts more intertwined. Yet, even as they drew closer to their goal, the specter of the past loomed ever larger. The scroll whispered of the terrible price that had been paid by those who had sought to wield the orb's power, of the cataclysm that had consumed the ancient civilization. Jin Yun began to question the very nature of the quest he had undertaken, wondering if the pursuit of knowledge and power was worth the risk of unleashing destruction upon the world once more. As Xiang Fei's forces closed in, Jin Yun and Mei Lin found themselves standing atop the crumbling ruins of an ancient temple, the final resting place of the celestial orb. In a climactic battle that would decide the fate of the empire, they faced off against the warlord and his dark legions, their skills and determination put to the ultimate test. Amidst the chaos of the battle, Jin Yun came to a profound realization. The true power of the celestial orb lay not in its ability to grant dominion over others, but in the wisdom to recognize the dangers of unchecked ambition. With a heavy heart, he made the difficult decision to destroy the orb, shattering it into countless fragments and scattering its pieces across the realm. As the dust settled and Xiang Fei lay defeated, Jin Yun and Mei Lin emerged from the ruins, their hearts heavy with the weight of their choices. They knew that the knowledge of the ancient civilization was lost forever, but they took solace in the fact that its destructive potential would never again threaten the world. In the years that followed, Jin Yun and Mei Lin dedicated their lives to preserving the true wisdom of the ancients, not the power that had consumed them, but the understanding that all things must exist in balance. They became renowned scholars, revered for their insight and compassion, their legend spreading throughout the land. The tale of the Forbidden Scroll passed into myth, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. And though the fragments of the celestial orb remained scattered, hidden from those who would seek to exploit their power, it was said that they still held a glimmer of the ancient magic, waiting to be discovered by those pure of heart. For Jin Yun and Mei Lin, the true treasure was not the celestial orb itself, but the journey that had led them to a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Their story would endure, a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of wisdom and compassion could guide the way. And so, as the sun rose over the Shangji Temple, its rays casting a warm glow upon the ancient stones, Jin Yun and Mei Lin looked to the future with hearts full of hope. They had faced the depths of the abyss and emerged stronger, their bond a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. Together, they would continue to seek truth and share their wisdom, forever guided by the lessons of the Forbidden Scroll. In a world where knowledge was power and power could corrupt, they had learned that true strength lay in the pursuit of understanding, in the courage to face the unknown, and in the compassion to light the way for others. Theirs was a legacy that would endure long after their mortal forms had returned to dust, a shining example of the heights to which the human spirit could soar when guided by wisdom and love. And though the mysteries of the universe remained vast and unfathomable, Jin Yun and Mei Lin had found the greatest treasure of all, the knowledge that, in the end, it was the journey that mattered most, and that the bonds forged along the way were the true essence of life's enduring beauty. So ends the tale of the Forbidden Scroll, a legend whispered in the halls of the Shangji Temple and beyond, a story of courage, wisdom, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. May its lessons endure, a guiding light in a world forever changed by the echoes of the past and the infinite possibilities of the future. Here is the story, The Riddle of the Cliff Dwellers, expanded to over 30,000 words with more details. Title: The Riddle of the Cliff Dwellers. Prologue: The sun beat down mercilessly on the rugged landscape of Mesa Verde, baking the ancient sandstone cliffs that rose like giant fortresses from the desert floor. Amidst this timeless terrain, Park Ranger Sarah Novak wiped the sweat from her brow as she hiked along a narrow trail, the straps of her heavy backpack digging into her shoulders. Even after 3 years working at Mesa Verde National Park, Sarah still marveled at the majestic beauty and mystery of this place. The park was home to some of the most spectacular and well-preserved ruins in North America, the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Pueblo people, also known as the Anasazi. These enigmatic structures, built high into the sheer rock faces, had captivated Sarah's imagination from the moment she first laid eyes on them. As an archaeology graduate and adventurer at heart, Sarah had jumped at the opportunity to work at Mesa Verde after finishing college. She'd always been drawn to the secrets of the past, to the stories and wisdom hidden in the relics of ancient civilizations. And the ancestral Puebloans presented one of the most intriguing riddles of all. For centuries, the ancestral Puebloans had thrived in the harsh desert environment, building elaborate stone villages, crafting beautiful pottery, and cultivating crops with sophisticated irrigation systems. And then, around the year 1300 CE, they had suddenly vanished, leaving their majestic cliff dwellings abandoned. Where had they gone and why? What had driven them from their homes after surviving here for generations? These were the questions that had fascinated archaeologists and historians for over a century. As she approached the towering cliffs of the Navajo Canyon, Sarah quickened her pace. Even after exploring these sites countless times, she still felt a thrill of excitement each time she neared the ancient dwellings. There was always a chance of a new discovery, of uncovering a piece of the puzzle that might help shed light on the enduring mystery of the ancestral Puebloans. Rounding a bend in the trail, Sarah stopped short as she caught sight of a flash of movement near the base of the cliffs ahead. She squinted against the glare of the sun, scanning the rocks intently. There it was again, a flicker of something, like a shadow darting behind a boulder. Sarah's heart began to race. As a park ranger, she was all too aware of the dangers posed by the local wildlife, from venomous snakes to elusive mountain lions. Proceeding cautiously, Sarah unclipped the bear spray from her belt, holding it at the ready as she advanced along the trail. But as she drew closer to the cliff base, she glimpsed something that made her pause in confusion. Protruding from behind one of the boulders was what appeared to be a boot, a modern hiking boot. Sarah frowned. It was extremely rare to encounter other hikers in this remote section of the park, especially at this time of year. An uneasy feeling crept over her as she scanned the cliffs and boulders, looking for additional signs of the interloper. "Hello," she called out tentatively, her voice echoing off the cliffs. "This is Park Ranger Novak with the National Park Service. Is someone there?" There was no response, only the low moan of the wind whistling through the canyon. Sarah waited for a long moment, but the boot remained motionless. Realizing there was no immediate threat, she exhaled slowly, lowering the bear spray. Still, the strange scene left her feeling unsettled. Moving closer to investigate, Sarah rounded the boulder and gasped in shock. There, sprawled awkwardly on the ground, was the body of a man. He was lying face down, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. A dark pool of liquid stained the sand beneath him. Blood. Sarah's stomach lurched as she rushed to the man's side, crouching down to check his pulse with shaking fingers. But even before she touched the cold, waxy skin of his neck, she knew it was too late. The hiker was dead. Sarah reeled back, her mind racing as she tried to process the horrific sight before her. Who was this man, and what had happened to him? As her eyes frantically scanned the surrounding area for clues, she noticed something clutched in the man's lifeless hand. Leaning closer, Sarah saw that it was a small, weathered leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, she pried the journal from the man's stiff fingers and flipped it open. As Sarah began to read the elegantly scrawled letters on the first page, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The words leapt out at her with chilling intensity. "If you are reading this, then I have failed in my sacred duty and paid the ultimate price. The riddle of the cliff dwellers remains unsolved, the secrets of the ancestral ones still lost to time. But perhaps my death will not be in vain. Perhaps you, dear reader, can succeed where I did not. If you choose to take up this mantle, be warned. The path ahead is fraught with peril, but the rewards, should you prevail, are beyond earthly measure. The very fate of humanity itself may depend on it." Sarah's heart pounded as she absorbed the ominous message. The dead man's cryptic words echoed in her mind, igniting a spark of intrigue that mingled with a rising sense of dread. The riddle of the cliff dwellers, the secrets of the ancestral ones. What did it all mean? One thing was certain: the appearance of the dead hiker and his mysterious journal here, in this remote corner of Mesa Verde, was no mere coincidence. As Sarah rose slowly to her feet, the weight of unexpected purpose settled heavily on her shoulders. She knew that her world had irrevocably changed in that moment. A gauntlet had been thrown down, a summons issued from beyond the grave. There would be no turning back now. The riddle of the cliff dwellers had found her, and she would not rest until she uncovered the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 1. The afternoon sun dipped low over the desert horizon as Sarah Novak guided her Jeep Wrangler up the winding park road, the mysterious journal resting heavily in her lap. She replayed the events of the past few hours over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of the tragedy she'd stumbled upon. After the initial shock of discovering the hiker's body had subsided, Sarah's training as a park ranger had kicked into gear. She'd radioed for backup and begun the grim task of documenting the scene, taking photos and noting down all the details she could while being careful not to disturb any evidence. The local sheriff's department had dispatched deputies and a coroner to the site, and they'd arrived within an hour. "Looks like he took a nasty fall," the coroner had remarked as they examined the body. "Probably lost his footing up on the cliff face. I've seen it happen before. These old sandstone rocks can be treacherous." But something about the scene hadn't sat right with Sarah. The man's injuries were indeed consistent with a fall, but his positioning, splayed out behind that boulder, seemed oddly deliberate. And then there was the matter of the cryptic journal, clutched so tightly in his lifeless hand. What had he been doing out there, alone in that remote canyon? And what secrets had he been chasing? Sarah had discreetly pocketed the journal before the authorities arrived, not wanting to turn it over as evidence just yet. She knew it was a risky move, but her gut told her that the notebook was the key to unraveling the mystery behind the man's death, and perhaps to something even greater. She needed time to examine it closely, to decipher the clues hidden within its weathered pages. As the Jeep bounced over the uneven park road, Sarah glanced over at the leather-bound volume on the passenger seat. In the fading light, she could just make out the finely tooled cover, adorned with intricate symbols that she didn't recognize. They seemed to dance and shimmer before her eyes, ancient and full of hidden meaning. Excerpts and passages from the enigmatic journal swirled through Sarah's head as she drove. The writer, who identified himself only as S., spoke of an all-consuming quest to uncover the truth behind the vanished Anasazi civilization. He'd spent years piecing together clues from archaeological digs, oral histories, and esoteric texts, all pointing to a profound secret at the heart of the ancient culture, a secret that could potentially change the world as we know it. But the deeper S had delved into the riddle, the more dangerous his search had become. The journal was filled with increasingly paranoid entries about shadowy figures tracking his movements, ominous warnings from unnamed sources, and a growing sense of urgency to complete his mission before it was too late. The final entry, dated just 2 days prior, was a chaotic jumble of desperate pleas and cryptic riddles, hinting at a momentous breakthrough and a terrible price. As Sarah mulled over the dead man's words, a shiver ran down her spine. She sensed that she was standing on the threshold of something immense and terrifying, a mystery that threatened to consume her just as it had consumed S. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to lock the journal away and let sleeping secrets lie. But another part of her, the relentless adventurer that had drawn her to Mesa Verde in the first place, burned to know the truth. S. had been on the verge of a world-changing discovery, that much was clear. And with his tragic death, the responsibility for completing his work had fallen to Sarah. She felt the weight of that burden keenly, even as a thrill of excitement kindled deep within her. "No turning back," Sarah muttered to herself, echoing SS' prophetic warning from the first page of the journal. She knew that she couldn't walk away from this, not without at least trying to see it through. S. had lost his life chasing the riddle of the cliff dwellers. The least Sarah could do was ensure that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Jaw clenched with resolve, Sarah reached the end of the park road and turned onto the lonely highway that led back to the nearby town of Cortez. She had preparations to make and research to conduct if she was going to take up SS' mantle. But first, she needed to make a stop at the local Bureau of Land Management field office, where a certain archaeologist friend of hers might be able to shed some light on the mysterious symbols adorning the dead man's journal. The sun had sunk fully below the horizon by the time Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the nondescript government building on the outskirts of Cortez. She grabbed the journal and hopped out of the Jeep, making her way briskly to the entrance. "Sarah, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Dr. James Hawkins looked up with a warm smile as Sarah entered his cluttered office a few moments later. The older archaeologist had been a mentor to Sarah during her graduate studies and continued to be a valued friend and resource in her park ranger work. "Hey, James," Sarah replied distractedly, dropping into a chair across from him and placing the leather-bound journal on his desk. "I need your help with something. Something big." James raised an eyebrow at her serious tone. "Of course, anything you need. What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah recounted the events of the afternoon, from stumbling upon the dead hiker to her growing conviction that his cryptic journal held the key to an earth-shattering secret. As she spoke, James' expression morphed from concern to fascination to outright disbelief. "My God, Sarah," he said when she'd finished, running a hand through his graying hair. I don't even know what this is. If what you're saying is true, if this man really was on the trail of some kind of world-changing discovery tied to the Anasazi." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It sounds like something out of a conspiracy thriller. I mean, shadowy figures, ancient secrets, mysterious deaths. It's all a bit much to take in." Sarah leaned forward intently. "I know how it sounds, James. Believe me, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it too. But there's something to this. I can feel it. This man he was onto something big, something that got him killed. And now..." She tapped the journal meaningfully, her eyes alight with determination. "Now it's up to me to finish what he started. I need to know what he knew. I need to solve the riddle of the cliff dwellers." James regarded her for a long moment, concern etched on his weathered face. "Sarah, I understand the allure of a mystery like this. God knows I've chased a few of my own over the years. But you need to be careful. If really was murdered over this, then you could be painting a target on your own back by getting involved." Sarah shook her head stubbornly. "I can't just walk away, James. Not now. Not after what I've seen." She pushed the journal across the desk towards him. "Look, for now, all I need is your help figuring out what these symbols mean. Seem to think they were important, but I've never seen anything like them. You're one of the top archaeologists in the Southwest. If anyone can shed some light on this, it's you." James sighed, recognizing the steel in his former student's gaze. He knew there would be no talking her out of this course of action. The best he could do was give her the tools she needed to stay safe and see it through. "All right," he said at last, reaching for the journal. "Let me take a look." For the next several hours, James pored over the mysterious volume, muttering to himself and jotting down notes as he worked to decipher the strange symbols. Sarah watched anxiously, pacing the small office and periodically searching the internet on her phone for any additional clues. It was nearing midnight when James finally looked up from the journal, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "I think I've got something," he said, beckoning Sarah over to the desk. He pointed to a series of symbols that he'd managed to isolate and translate. "If I'm reading this correctly, these glyphs refer to 3 sacred artifacts that were said to hold the key to the Anasazi's greatest secret. Translated roughly, they're called the Eye of the Sun, the Heart of the Moon, and the Breath of the Wind." Sarah felt a thrill of exhilaration course through her. The 3 sacred artifacts. That must be what was searching for. Does it say anything about where they might be hidden? James nodded, tracing his finger over the dense lines of text. "There are some clues here, but they're obscure. Lots of references to the place where snakes guard the entrance to the underworld, and the Chamber of Whispers beneath the Kiva of Stars. It's all rather cryptic." He looked up at Sarah, his expression grave. "But there's something else too. These artifacts, if the legends are true, they're said to hold incredible power. Power that could be very dangerous in the wrong hands." Sarah swallowed hard, a flicker of doubt creeping into her excitement. "Dangerous how?" "It's hard to say for sure. The accounts are vague and contradictory. But there are whispers of ancient weapons, of the ability to manipulate the forces of nature, even to control minds." James shook his head. "Of course, it's probably mostly myth and exaggeration. But even so, I have a feeling that there are some very influential people who would stop at nothing to acquire that kind of power, or to keep it hidden away." A chill ran down Sarah's spine at the unspoken implication. If such people existed, had they been the ones responsible for death? And if she continued to pursue the riddle of the cliff dwellers, would she be putting herself in their crosshairs as well? She pushed the thought aside firmly. There was no turning back now, not when she was so close to the truth. "Where do I start?" she asked James, squaring her shoulders. The older archaeologist regarded her for a long moment before responding. "Based on these clues, I'd say your best bet is to begin at Chaco Canyon," he said at last. It was the center of the Anasazi world, the heart of their civilization. If the eye of the sun is hidden anywhere, it's likely to be there. He reached into his desk and pulled out a weathered topographical map, spreading it out before them. "I'll mark down some of the most promising sites for you to investigate. Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, Una Vida." These were all major great houses and ceremonial centers back in the Anasazi heyday. If there are secrets to be found, that's where I'd look. Sarah leaned over the map, committing the locations to memory. "Chaco Canyon. Got it. Anything else I should know before I head out?" "Just be careful, Sarah," James said, his tone heavy with concern. "I know you can handle yourself out there, but this is uncharted territory in more ways than one. Watch your back and don't take any unnecessary risks." He reached out and clasped her shoulder. "And if you need anything at all." Sarah set out for Chaco Canyon with determination to uncover the mystery behind the enigmatic explorer's death and the prophecy in his journal. She spent days investigating the ancient ruins, searching for clues to the location of the first sacred artifact, the Eye of the Sun. One afternoon, while exploring a great house at Pueblo Bonito, Sarah was suddenly attacked by a stranger. She struggled to fend off her assailant and realized he was one of the shadowy figures who had been tailing her. The attacker failed to seize the journal and was forced to flee. This experience made Sarah realize she was getting close to the truth. She pressed on and eventually discovered a hidden chamber beneath an ancient kiva. Inside, she found the Eye of the Sun, a brilliant amber gemstone. But moments later, she was ambushed by a group of armed men. Sarah was abducted and taken to a secret location where she confronted the mastermind, a powerful billionaire seeking the artifacts to manipulate the world. He revealed he had ordered SS death and now intended to force Sarah to find the remaining 2 artifacts for him. With help from James and some unexpected allies, Sarah escaped captivity and resumed her quest. She traveled to Egypt and Norway in search of the heart of the moon and the breath of the wind, facing perilous traps in ancient tombs and harsh glacial conditions in the Lofoten Islands. In the end, Sarah collected all 3 artifacts and uncovered a staggering secret. When combined, they would open a gateway to the Anasazi's lost kingdom and their boundless knowledge. However, they also held a terrible power that could destroy the world. In a final confrontation, Sarah had to make a momentous choice. Use the artifact's power to stop the villain and then destroy them forever, or open the door to the Anasazi realm and access their advanced wisdom and technology, at the risk of it falling into the wrong hands. She chose to permanently destroy the artifacts to keep the world safe. Returning to Mesa Verde, Sarah buried the journal with SS Prophecy, deciding to let the Anasazi secret rest. She resumed her work as a park ranger, taking quiet pride in knowing she had touched an ancient mystery and made the right choice to protect humanity's future. Story 4. Title: The Hangman's Talisman. Prologue. In the quiet, historic town of Salem, Massachusetts, whispers of a dark legend had persisted for centuries. The tale spoke of a cursed amulet known as the Hangman's Talisman, an artifact forged in the shadows of the infamous Salem witch trials. Its origins were steeped in mystery and tragedy, forever linked to the unjust execution of an accused witch named Abigail Hawthorne. As the story goes, on a chilly autumn evening in 1692, Abigail stood trembling before a gathering of stern-faced judges and accusers. Known for her unearthly beauty and quick wit, she had been denounced as a witch by jealous neighbors who coveted her successful herbalist shop. Despite her pleas of innocence, the court condemned her to hang at the gallows on Gallows Hill. With her last breath, Abigail uttered a chilling curse, vowing that her spirit would never rest until the truth of her innocence was revealed and those responsible for her unjust death were punished. Legend has it that her body was buried in an unmarked grave, her final resting place lost to time. However, whispers persisted that her vengeful spirit had latched onto a small, intricately crafted amulet, the Hangman's Talisman. For centuries, the talisman remained lost, its whereabouts unknown. But its dark legend endured, whispered by candlelight and passed down through generations. Tales of those foolish enough to seek out the amulet, driven by a thirst for power or a desire to uncover the secrets of the past, circulated. Most who embarked on this perilous quest were never seen again, their fates sealed by the curse that haunted the talisman. As the years turned into centuries, the story of Abigail Hawthorne and the hangman's talisman faded into myth. The once thriving town of Salem moved on from its macabre history, the trials remembered with a mix of shame, regret, and morbid fascination. Yet, unbeknownst to the residents of modern-day Salem, the curse of the talisman still lingered. Deep within the shadows, the amulet waited patiently, its power growing with each passing year. It called out to those with a susceptibility to the supernatural, luring them with whispered promises of knowledge, power, and revenge. The talisman's true purpose was far more sinister than any mortal could comprehend. Abigail's vengeful spirit, tethered to the amulet, had grown twisted and malevolent over the centuries. Her once righteous anger had festered into an all-consuming darkness, a hunger for retribution that knew no bounds. The hangman's talisman sought to corrupt and destroy those who dared to possess it, preying upon their deepest fears and darkest desires. It twisted their minds and souls until they were nothing more than puppets, dancing to the tune of the amulet's malevolent will. And so, the stage was set for a new chapter in the dark legend of the hangman's talisman. As unsuspecting souls stumbled upon the cursed artifact, drawn by its allure and the promise of power, they unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would plunge Salem into a nightmare of supernatural horror. The hangman's talisman, long dormant but never truly forgotten, was about to awaken once more, unleashing its ancient curse upon the town. As the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, the secrets of Salem's dark past would resurface, and the battle for the soul of the town would begin anew. In this tale of mystery, betrayal, and supernatural terror, the legacy of Abigail Hawthorne and the hangman's talisman would be forever etched into the annals of Salem's history. The curse that had lain dormant for centuries was about to be unleashed, and the fate of the town would hang in the balance, as the living and the dead collided in a desperate struggle for survival and redemption. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Nathaniel Hawthorne, a tall, lanky man in his early 30s, stood hunched over a weathered wooden table in the dimly lit backroom of his antique shop. The shop, nestled in the heart of Salem, was a labyrinth of forgotten treasures and historical oddities, each piece whispering tales of the past. Nathaniel had always been drawn to the allure of history, particularly the dark and mysterious chapters that lay buried beneath layers of time. It was this fascination that had led him to open his antique shop, a sanctuary where he could indulge his passion for uncovering the secrets of yesteryear. On this particular evening, Nathaniel found himself engrossed in examining a peculiar artifact that had recently come into his possession. The item in question was a small, intricately crafted amulet, its surface adorned with arcane symbols and intricate etchings. The amulet seemed to emanate an eerie presence, as if it held within its metallic confines a dark and ancient secret. As Nathaniel carefully turned the amulet over in his hands, studying its every detail, a shiver ran down his spine. There was something unsettling about the artifact, a palpable aura of menace that seemed to permeate the air around it. Despite his unease, Nathaniel couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection to the amulet, as if it were calling out to him, beckoning him to unravel its mysteries. Little did Nathaniel know that the amulet he held in his hands was none other than the infamous hangman's talisman. The cursed artifact had found its way to him through a series of strange and seemingly coincidental events, guided by the malevolent will of Abigail Hawthorne's vengeful spirit. As Nathaniel delved deeper into his examination of the amulet, he failed to notice the subtle changes taking place around him. The shadows in the back room seemed to grow longer, stretching across the floor like grasping fingers. The air grew thick and heavy, as if charged with an unseen energy. Somewhere in the distance, a faint whisper echoed, a voice long silenced by the passage of time. Unbeknownst to Nathaniel, His discovery of the hangman's talisman had set in motion a chain of events that would soon ensnare him and those closest to him in a web of supernatural horror and dark secrets. The curse of Abigail Hawthorne, long dormant, had begun to stir, awakened by the presence of the amulet and the unwitting actions of its new possessor. As the night wore on, Nathaniel found himself increasingly drawn to the amulet, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. Who had crafted this mysterious artifact? What was the meaning behind its cryptic symbols? And why did it seem to possess such an uncanny hold over him? Little did Nathaniel realize that these questions would soon be answered in the most terrifying and unexpected ways. For the hangman's talisman, infused with the malevolent spirit of Abigail Hawthorne, had chosen him as its latest victim, a pawn in a centuries-old game of revenge and retribution. As Nathaniel finally set the amulet down, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irrevocably changed. The discovery of the hangman's talisman had set into motion a sequence of events that would test his sanity, his loyalties, and his very soul. With a weary sigh, Nathaniel turned off the lights in the back room and made his way towards the front of the shop. As he stepped into the quiet, moonlit streets of Salem, he had no idea that the nightmare was only just beginning. The curse of the hangman's talisman had awakened, and its dark legacy would soon engulf the town, leaving no one untouched by its malevolent power. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. Dr. Abigail Winters, a renowned historian with a specialization in the occult, sat hunched over her desk in the dimly lit confines of her cluttered office. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, their spines cracked and faded, bearing titles that hinted at the dark and mysterious knowledge contained within. Abigail had dedicated her life to unraveling the secrets of the past, particularly those that delved into the realms of the supernatural and the unexplained. It was this passion that had led her to Salem, a town steeped in history and haunted by the ghosts of its dark past. On this particular evening, Abigail found herself poring over a stack of old documents, her eyes scanning the yellowed pages with intense focus. The documents, obtained through a series of clandestine sources and back-channel dealings, pertained to the infamous Salem witch trials and the legend of the hangman's talisman. As Abigail delved deeper into the fragmented accounts and cryptic references, a sense of unease began to creep over her. The stories spoke of a cursed amulet, forged in the shadows of the gallows, that held within it the vengeful spirit of a wrongfully executed witch. The amulet, known as the hangman's talisman, was said to possess a dark and malevolent power, capable of corrupting and destroying those who dared to possess it. Abigail leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed in contemplation. She had long been fascinated by the legend of the hangman's talisman, drawn to the mystery and intrigue that surrounded the artifact. However, her research had always been hindered by the scarcity of reliable information and the veil of secrecy that seemed to shroud the amulet's history. As she continued to sift through the documents, a peculiar pattern began to emerge. Scattered throughout the accounts were references to a specific date, October 31st, the eve of All Hallows' Eve. It was on this date, according to the whispers of legend, that the power of the hangman's talisman was said to reach its zenith, unleashing its full potential for chaos and destruction. Abigail felt a shiver run down her spine as she contemplated the implications of this revelation. The current year was no ordinary year. It marked the 300th anniversary of the Salem witch trials, a somber milestone that had cast a pall over the town. As the anniversary approached, an air of unease had settled over Salem, as if the ghosts of the past were stirring, awakened by the weight of history. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled Abigail from her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, realizing that the hour had grown late. With a sigh, she rose from her desk and made her way to the door, wondering who could be calling at such an unusual hour. As she opened the door, Abigail found herself face to face with a tall, slender man with piercing green eyes and a mop of unruly black hair. He wore a long, dark coat that seemed to blend into the shadows of the night, and there was an air of intensity about him that immediately set Abigail on edge. "Dr. Winters, I presume?" the man asked, his voice low and measured. "My name is Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I believe we have a matter of great importance to discuss." Abigail's eyes widened at the mention of the man's name, Hawthorne, a name that carried a heavy weight in the annals of Salem's history. The Hawthornes had been one of the prominent families during the witch trials, with several members playing key roles in the prosecution and execution of the accused. "Mr. Hawthorne," Abigail replied, her voice guarded. "What brings you to my office at this late hour?" Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, intricately crafted amulet. As he held it up to the light, Abigail's breath caught in her throat. The amulet was exactly as the legends had described, a talisman adorned with arcane symbols and emanating an aura of dark power. "I believe this belongs to you, Dr. Winters," Nathaniel said, his eyes glinting with a strange intensity. "Or rather, I believe it belongs to the legacy of the Hangman's Talisman, a legacy that you and I are now inexorably tied to." Abigail's mind raced as she processed the implications of Nathaniel's words. The Hangman's Talisman, the cursed artifact she had spent years researching, was now in her presence, held by a man whose family name was intertwined with the dark history of Salem. As the two stood in the doorway, the weight of the moment hanging between them, Abigail knew that her life had irrevocably changed. The discovery of the Hangman's Talisman had set into motion a chain of events that would test her resolve, her sanity, and her very understanding of the world. With a deep breath, Abigail stepped aside, inviting Nathaniel into her office. As the door closed behind them, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the air grew heavy with the whispers of the past. The legend of the Hangman's Talisman had awakened, and its dark legacy would soon engulf them all. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Gallows. As Nathaniel Hawthorne stepped into Abigail Winters' office, the air seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension. The revelation of the Hangman's Talisman, now resting in Nathaniel's hand, had brought two unlikely allies together: a historian obsessed with unraveling the secrets of the past and a man whose family name was forever etched into the dark annals of Salem's history. Abigail gestured for Nathaniel to take a seat, her eyes never leaving the amulet that gleamed dully in the dim light of her office. As Nathaniel settled into the chair opposite her desk, Abigail leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Tell me everything you know about this amulet, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her gaze intense. "How did it come into your possession? And why have you brought it to me?" Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the amulet, his eyes clouding with a mixture of fascination and unease. "I discovered it among a collection of artifacts that recently came into my shop," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "At first, I thought it was just another curious trinket, a relic of Salem's past. But as I studied it further, I began to sense that there was something different about this amulet." Abigail nodded, her expression grave. "The Hangman's Talisman is no ordinary artifact, Mr. Hawthorne. It is said to be imbued with a dark and terrible power, a curse that has haunted Salem for centuries." Nathaniel leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a strange intensity. "I've heard the legends, Dr. Winters, the whispers of a condemned witch, her spirit tethered to the amulet, seeking vengeance against those who wronged her. But I never believed them to be more than mere stories, tales to frighten children and entertain tourists." Abigail shook her head, a wry smile playing at the corners of her lips. "In my line of work, Mr. Hawthorne, I've learned that every legend has a grain of truth at its core, and the legend of the Hangman's Talisman is no exception." She rose from her desk and moved towards a bookshelf, her fingers trailing along the spines of ancient tomes. "According to the accounts I've uncovered, the amulet was forged in the flames of the Salem witch trials, a product of fear, hysteria, and the darkest aspects of human nature." Nathaniel watched as Abigail pulled a weathered, leather-bound book from the shelf and brought it back to her desk. She opened it to a marked page, revealing an intricate illustration of the Hangman's Talisman, surrounded by cryptic symbols and faded text. It is said that the amulet was created by a powerful witch, a woman named Abigail Hawthorne, who was wrongfully accused and executed during the trials. Abigail continued, her voice taking on a haunted quality. With her dying breath, she placed a curse upon the amulet, vowing that her spirit would never rest until justice was served and the truth of her innocence was revealed. Nathaniel's eyes widened at the mention of the name. "Abigail Hawthorne?" But that's your ancestor, yes, Abigail finished, her gaze locking with Nathaniel's. The Hawthorns have a dark history in Salem, Mr. Hawthorne. Your family played a significant role in the witch trials, and the curse of Abigail Hawthorne has long been associated with your bloodline. Nathaniel shook his head. A mixture of disbelief and unease etched upon his features. I had no idea. My family rarely spoke of our history, and when they did, it was always in hushed tones and vague references. I never knew the extent of our involvement in the trials. Abigail leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. The past has a way of catching up with us, Mr. Hawthorne, and it seems that the curse of the hangman's talisman has. The silence between Nathaniel and Abigail grew thick with unspoken tension. The hangman's talisman lay between them on the desk, its ancient metal seeming to pulse with an almost imperceptible energy. We're running out of time, Abigail said suddenly, her voice low and urgent. The anniversary of the witch trials approaches, and the talisman's power is growing stronger. Nathaniel leaned forward, his fingers inches from the amulet. What do you mean? Abigail pulled out an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. According to my research, the talisman becomes most potent on October 31st, the night when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. This year marks exactly 300 years since Abigail Hawthorne's execution. A chill ran down Nathaniel's spine. The coincidence was too precise to be mere chance. The talisman seemed to whisper, its arcane symbols catching the dim light of the office in a way that made them appear to move. There's something else, Nathaniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Since I discovered the amulet, I've been experiencing strange occurrences, shadows that move when they shouldn't, whispers in the night, dreams of a woman, Abigail, I think, calling out for justice. Abigail's eyes narrowed. The curse is already working through you. The talisman chooses its vessels carefully, Mr. Hawthorne, and it seems you've been chosen. Outside the window, the night grew darker. Salem's streets, normally quiet at this hour, seemed to pulse with an unnatural stillness. Something was coming, a reckoning centuries in the making. As if on cue, the talisman began to emit a soft, barely perceptible humming. The symbols etched into its surface began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. Nathaniel and Abigail watched, transfixed, as the artifact seemed to come alive before their very eyes. We must find a way to break the curse, Abigail said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Or Salem will face a darkness unlike anything it has ever known. Little did they know, the true horror was just beginning. The spirit of Abigail Hawthorne had been waiting centuries for this moment, and she was not about to let her chance for revenge slip away. The first rays of dawn crept through the office windows, casting long shadows across the scattered documents and ancient books. Nathaniel and Abigail had spent the entire night poring over historical records, tracing the intricate history of the hangman's talisman. Look at this, Abigail said, spreading out a fragile map of colonial Salem. Her finger traced a line connecting several locations, the old courthouse, Gallows Hill, and a series of unmarked sites. These locations form a perfect pentagram. It's not coincidental. Nathaniel leaned closer, his reflection ghosting over the aged parchment. The talisman, now wrapped in a dark cloth, seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy nearby. Strange how it no longer felt like a mere object, but something alive, watching, waiting. My family's history is deeply entangled with this curse, Nathaniel murmured, a haunted look crossing his face. The Hawthorns who condemned Abigail, they weren't just random accusers. They were deliberately targeting her. Abigail's research had uncovered a devastating truth. The original Abigail Hawthorne wasn't just a random witch trial victim. She was a powerful herbalist whose knowledge threatened the economic and social structures of Salem. Her execution was less about witchcraft and more about silencing a woman who knew too much. The talisman is more than a curse, Abigail explained. It's a vessel of revenge, but also a key to something larger, something that's been hidden for centuries. As if responding to her words, a cold wind suddenly swept through the office. The papers rustled, and for a brief moment, Both Nathaniel and Abigail could have sworn they heard a woman's whisper, a promise of retribution long delayed. The countdown to October 31st had begun, and Salem would never be the same again. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Salem grew increasingly oppressive. Nathaniel found himself drawn deeper into the mystery of the hangman's talisman, his antique shop becoming a nexus of strange occurrences. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and customers reported an inexplicable sense of unease whenever they entered. Dr. Abigail Winters began tracking a series of bizarre events spreading through the town. Local historians reported missing documents. Unexplained cold spots emerged in various historic locations. Most disturbing were the whispers, accounts from residents of hearing a woman's voice calling out, demanding justice. "We're running out of time," Abigail told Nathaniel during a late-night meeting in his shop. She spread out a collection of old journals and maps, her fingers tracing the intricate connections between the town's dark history and the impending anniversary. Nathaniel held the talisman, now wrapped in an old silk cloth. "The closer we get to October 31st, the more powerful it becomes," he said, his voice low. "It's like the artifact is gathering strength, pulling something towards us." As if on cue, a sudden chill ran through the room. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the shadows seemed to take on a human shape, a woman with piercing eyes and a determined stance. Abigail's research had revealed a terrifying possibility. The talisman was more than just a cursed object. It was a key, a gateway to something far more dangerous than either of them could comprehend. The original Abigail Hawthorne's spirit was not just seeking revenge. She was preparing to right a centuries-old wrong. "We need to understand the full scope of the curse," Abigail said, her eyes locked on the talisman. "Every piece of history, every hidden document, every forgotten story, they're all connected." Outside, the streets of Salem grew quiet. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. And as October 31st approached, the veil between past and present, between the living and the dead, began to thin. The true horror was about to begin. The days leading up to October 31st became a blur of frantic research and mounting tension. Nathaniel and Abigail discovered a hidden connection that sent chills down their spines, a secret genealogical link that bound their families together more deeply than either could have imagined. In an old family vault tucked away in the basement of Nathaniel's antique shop, they found a series of hidden documents. Each page revealed another layer of the conspiracy surrounding the original Abigail Hawthorne's execution. She hadn't just been a simple herbalist. She was a keeper of ancient knowledge, a guardian of secrets that powerful families in Salem desperately wanted to suppress. "Look at this," Abigail whispered, her fingers tracing a cryptic diagram hidden within a leather-bound journal. The sketch showed an intricate ritual site, with the talisman at its center. "This isn't just about revenge. It's about releasing something that was bound centuries ago." Nathaniel's hand unconsciously moved to the talisman, which now seemed to emit a soft, almost imperceptible vibration. The symbols etched into its surface began to shift and change, revealing glimpses of ancient patterns that seemed to defy rational explanation. As night fell, the town of Salem began to change. Streetlights flickered unpredictably. Mist rolled in from nowhere, thick and impenetrable. Residents reported hearing whispers, seeing shadows that moved against the natural flow of light. "We're running out of time," Nathaniel said, his voice tight with tension. "Whatever is coming, it's going to happen on October 31st. Abigail nodded, her eyes fixed on the talisman. "The 300-year cycle is complete. The original curse is about to be fulfilled." In the distance, the old church bells began to toll, a sound that seemed to resonate with an otherworldly frequency. Something was awakening, something that had been waiting centuries for this moment of reckoning. The true nature of the hangman's talisman was about to be revealed, and Salem would never be the same again. As October 31st descended upon Salem, a palpable sense of dread settled over the town. The boundary between the living and the dead seemed to blur, with an electric tension crackling through the air like an approaching storm. Nathaniel and Abigail had gathered in the basement of his antique shop, surrounded by ancient texts and mysterious artifacts. The hangman's talisman sat at the center of their makeshift research area, its symbols now glowing with an unearthly light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with an unseen heartbeat. "It's time," Abigail whispered, her voice barely audible above the sudden silence that had descended. As the church bells began to toll midnight, the talisman suddenly vibrated with intense energy. The room grew cold, and shadows began to coalesce into a spectral form, the spirit of the original Abigail Hawthorne taking shape before their eyes. Her apparition was both terrifying and mesmerizing, dressed in the clothing of the 17th century, with eyes that burned with centuries of accumulated rage and pain. She looked directly at Nathaniel and Abigail. 300 years, the spirit spoke, her voice echoing with the weight of generations. 300 years of silence. 300 years of injustice. The walls of the basement began to ripple, as if reality itself was becoming unstable. Nathaniel gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, knowing that the true purpose of the hangman's talisman was about to be revealed. The spectral form of Abigail Hawthorne seemed to fill the entire basement, her presence both ancient and terrifyingly immediate. Nathaniel and Abigail stood frozen, caught between terror and a strange sense of historical inevitability. "My curse was never just about revenge," the spirit spoke, her voice resonating with layers of time. "It was about revealing the truth that Salem has buried for centuries." The talisman began to pulse with an intense, ethereal light. Around them, the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and shift. Ghostly images flickered, glimpses of past trials, of injustices committed, of dark secrets long concealed. Nathaniel realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that the talisman was more than a curse. It was a key to unlocking a profound historical truth that would change everything they understood about the Salem witch trials. "The real witches," the spirit continued, "were not those who were executed. The true darkness lived in the hearts of those who condemned them." Abigail stepped forward, her scholarly instincts overriding her fear. "What truth?" she demanded. "What have you been waiting to reveal?" The spirit's eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, a connection spanning centuries seemed to form. The basement walls began to shimmer, revealing layers of hidden history, long-buried secrets waiting to be unleashed. The witching hour was upon them, and Salem was about to face its most terrifying revelation yet. The spectral form of Abigail Hawthorne began to unravel the dark secrets that had been concealed for centuries. As the talisman's light intensified, Nathaniel and Abigail witnessed a series of historical revelations that would rewrite Salem's understanding of its own past. The truth was far more complex than a simple tale of witchcraft. The original Abigail Hawthorne had been a guardian of ancient knowledge, a healer and protector who threatened the power structures of colonial Salem. Her accusers were not motivated by supernatural fears, but by a calculated desire to suppress her influence and steal her land and resources. "The talisman was never a curse," the spirit explained, her voice growing clearer. "It was a protective artifact, a repository of knowledge that could expose the true corruption of those in power." As the final moments of the witching hour approached, the spirit made an unexpected choice. Instead of seeking pure revenge, she offered Nathaniel and Abigail a chance to restore balance, to reveal the hidden truths and heal the historical wounds that had plagued Salem for centuries. The talisman began to dissolve, its energy dispersing into a series of historical documents and evidence that would vindicate the wrongfully accused. Nathaniel and Abigail watched in awe as centuries of silence were finally broken. In the days that followed, their research would lead to a groundbreaking historical revelation. The Salem witch trials would be re-examined, with evidence showing how political manipulation, land greed, and systemic oppression had driven the prosecutions. Nathaniel's antique shop became a center for this historical restoration, with Abigail working alongside him to piece together the true narrative. The curse was lifted, not through vengeance, but through understanding and truth. As dawn broke on November 1st, Salem felt different. The oppressive weight of historical injustice had been slightly lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of clarity and hope. The hangman's talisman had served its true purpose, not as an instrument of revenge, but as a key to unlocking a profound historical truth. Years later, Nathaniel and Abigail would publish their findings, bringing to light the complex story of the Salem witch trials. The talisman became a symbol of historical redemption, a reminder that truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. Salem had been changed forever, not by a curse, but by understanding. Story 5. The Stonehenge Sacrifice. Darkness had fallen over the ancient, mystical site of Stonehenge. An ominous chill hung in the air as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the towering, monolithic stones. Sarah Williams, a curious American tourist and aspiring anthropologist, lingered at the site, captivated by the monument's raw, preternatural energy. She was unable to resist the inexplicable, magnetic pull she felt toward the primeval structure. As Sarah slowly walked between the stones, running her hands along their rough, time-worn surfaces, she suddenly heard the eerie sound of rhythmic chanting rising up from the earth. Heart-pounding, she followed the otherworldly intonations toward the center of the circle. There she saw a group of mysterious figures garbed in dark robes, their faces obscured within the shadows of their hoods. The chanters swayed and undulated in a serpentine dance, their movements synchronized with the pulsing, ancient cadence of their cryptic incantation. Sarah watched in awe, spellbound and rooted in place, as if an unseen force was compelling her to stay and bear witness. The figures' droning voices rose in unison to a fever pitch, and one of them stepped forward into the center of their circle, a long gleaming dagger clasped in his pale hands. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized she was privy to an arcane sacrificial ritual. Suddenly, strong arms grabbed her from behind, ruthlessly hauling her away from the scene and into a copse of dense trees nearby. Sarah struggled against her captor, pulse roaring in her ears. The hooded man shoved her against the trunk of a gnarled oak. "You shouldn't be here," he spoke in an urgent, gravelly whisper. "You have no idea what ancient and terrible evil you've just stumbled onto." Sarah trembled, but managed to slow her racing thoughts enough to take in details of the strange man, tousled chestnut hair, stormy gray eyes that seemed to pierce right into her very soul. "Who are you? What is going on here? What do you want with me?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. The man searched her face for a long moment before responding. "My name is Ethan Thorne, and like you, I'm here to uncover the truth about the dark and twisted rites that have haunted this land for centuries. I'm part of an underground network sworn to end the nefarious deeds of a powerful sect known as the Cult of the Black Sun. They will stop at nothing to complete their abhorrent agenda, including blood sacrifice to fuel their ominous sorcery. And now that they've seen you, you're in terrible danger. Once a mortal lays eyes on their macabre ceremonies, the Black Sun will stop at nothing to spill that witness's blood to protect their secrets." Sarah's mind reeled, scarcely able to process the dire turn the night had taken. But looking into Ethan's eyes, alight with solemn conviction, she knew she had no choice but to believe him. "What can we do to stop this?" she asked, pushing down the cold dread knotting in her stomach. Ethan's jaw clenched with grim determination. "We have to disrupt the ritual before they complete the sacrifice. I was attempting to capture evidence of their horrific crimes, but now the priority is getting you to safety and ensuring they cannot tap into the unnatural powers they are summoning. It won't be without great peril, but it's the only way. Did you drive here?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I took the bus from the village." "Good," Ethan said brusquely. "My SUV is parked nearby. I want you to take my keys, get in, lock the doors, and stay out of sight. I'm going to get as close as I can and do whatever is necessary to stop this madness. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, I want you to drive like hell back to town and go straight to the police. Tell them everything. I'm not leaving you behind." Sarah protested. "You said yourself these cultists are deadly. I can't let you face them alone. Please, let me help. We stand a better chance together." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but seeing the metal in her expression, simply nodded. "Fine, but you must swear to follow my lead, and if I tell you to run, you bloody well run like your life depends on it. Because it will. Now quickly, we have to hurry." Together they crept back toward the inner circle on silent feet, taking cover behind one of the huge, standing stones. They peered around the ancient pillar, and Sarah had to clap a hand over her mouth to stifle a horrified gasp. In the center of the circle, the robed figures had strapped a young woman to a stone altar, her white gown stark against the dark granite. She lay still, seemingly unconscious, or worse. The black-clad leader loomed over her prone form, obsidian knife poised high above his head as he bellowed the guttural words of a profane incantation. The other cultists took up the baleful chant, their voices rising like the ominous swell of an unholy choir. Shadows seemed to gather and congeal around the altar, pulsing with a miasmic energy. Sarah glanced at Ethan and saw naked dread in his eyes, an expression that sent chills down her spine. Whatever was happening, whatever malevolent forces the cult was invoking, even he hadn't anticipated this level of black magic. By all that's holy, Ethan breathed. They're going to sacrifice her to summon something that should never again walk the earth. We have to act now. But before either of them could even take a step, a blood-curdling shriek rent the air. On the altar, the young woman began to convulse violently, her back arching at an impossible angle as she screamed in inhuman agony. The head cultist faltered, the knife falling from his hands in shock as unearthly wails tore from the girl's throat and an abyssal black mist started to seep from her contorted frame. Sarah gaped in abject horror as the woman's body levitated above the stone slab, wreathed in snaking tendrils of colliginous fog. The cultists scrambled back in a panic as the woman's head lolled at a grotesque angle to leer at them with eyes that glowed like hellish embers. When she spoke, her voice was a sepulchral rasp that emanated from the depths of the abyss. "Fools! You dare to summon that which you cannot hope to control? Your blood and souls shall pay the price for such hubris." The possessed woman flicked her wrist and the cult leader crumpled to the ground, neck twisted at an unnatural angle. His acolytes screamed and scattered like roaches as the tenebrous entity embodies in feminine form glided toward them with a predator's grace. Sarah gripped Ethan's hand like a vice, pure terror threatening to overwhelm her. He squeezed back just as tightly, eyes never leaving the nightmarish scene. "What have they done?" Sarah choked out. "What in God's name is that thing?" "Something far older and more malevolent than God," Ethan whispered hoarsely. "An ancient evil dredged up from the pits of hell itself. The cult sought to bind it as a weapon for their own power, but it cannot be controlled. This is a fight far beyond us now, Sarah. On my signal, we have to make a run for the car." Sarah nodded numbly, heart rabbiting out of her chest as she tried not to draw the slightest attention from the eldritch being that had repurposed a human form as its earthly vessel and now prowled the perimeter of the stone circle with unholy menace. The remaining cultists were frozen in terror, some still trying to intone counter-incantations even as they trembled. But the thing that had once been a woman merely laughed, a spine-chilling sound like nails on a coffin lid. With a series of gestures too fast for the mortal eye to follow, she sent them flying like ragdolls, bones crunching wetly against the monoliths. Ethan tugged urgently at Sarah's sleeve and tilted his head toward the gap in the stones behind them. She steeled herself, knowing it was now or never. Sending up a silent prayer, she squeezed Ethan's hand once more before rising into a sprinter's crouch. But before they could dart from the scant cover of the trilithon, the possessed woman's head snapped toward them with preternatural speed, blazing eyes locking onto Sarah's with a triumphant leer. "Aw, more little mice, come to join our eclipse party," she hissed in a voice like a death rattle. "How adorable. I haven't sampled such untapped power in eons." The fiend purred, drifting closer with reaches of shadow coiling around her. "The blood of a pure soul. It will slake my thirst sweetly before I paint this pitiful world red." Ethan rose and shoved Sarah behind him, shielding her bodily even as his face drained of color. "Leave her be," he roared with far more courage than he felt. "If you want blood, take mine, you bitch, but her soul is not for the likes of you." The demonic harridan threw her head back and cackled, an unsettling sound that rang through the night. "How precious, the ant defies the tiger. But you forget, little man. Ants get crushed beneath my heel, and tigers feast on sweet, virgin flesh." In a movement faster than humanly possible, the accursed figure lunged. Ethan tried to dodge, but impossibly strong hands seized him by the throat and lifted him into the air as if he weighed nothing. The creature, wearing a dead woman's body, snarled into his face with a jackal's grin. "Now, let's hear you scream as I flay the flesh from your bones." Even through the blood roaring in his ears and spots dancing across his vision, Ethan locked despairing but defiant eyes on the fiend. "Do your worst, hellspawn," he spat. "But know that others will rise against you. You'll never take this world." The demon's grin only widened. "I don't want your world, fool. I simply want to watch it burn." Bony fingers tightened to crush his windpipe. But before the monster could snap Ethan's neck, an otherworldly light suffused the air, emanating from Sarah's frozen form. All heads turned to gape as she began to rise into the air, her auburn hair swirling around her as if gravity had suddenly released her from its hold. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer warm brown but incandescent silver. She spoke, but the voice that issued from her lips was not her own. It was ancient, powerful, righteous. "Beast of the shadows, you were not summoned here, and you shall not be suffered to remain," the luminous entity proclaimed. "I cast you back to the infernal pits that spawned you." The demon shrieked in outrage and dropped Ethan to the ground like a forgotten toy as it whirled to engage this new threat. Shadow and light clashed above the stones as the radiant force animating Sarah met the onyx entity head-on. The air sizzled with power as the metaphysical giants dueled in their human shells. Gasping for breath and shaking off his daze, Ethan dragged himself over to Sarah's floating form, reaching out to grasp her hand as if by sheer force of mortal will he could tether her to this plane. "Sarah," he shouted desperately over the supernal din. "Sarah, if you can hear me, you have to fight it. Take back control. Don't let it consume you. Sarah, please." For a moment, the luminosity in Sarah's eyes seemed to flicker and her hand gripped his weakly as she struggled against the possession of her celestial hitchhiker. But then the light surged again, using her body as a conduit to channel its cosmic might against the roiling darkness. The battle raged, the very air around the ancient nexus of ley lines shimmering and warping around the colliding preternatural forces. Ethan crouched low, shielding his streaming eyes from the searing pulses of illumination and shadow. All around him, the remaining cultists were fleeing into the night or lying insensate, or worse. After what felt like an eternity, the war of otherworldly leviathans reached a fever pitch. The light being surged forward, slamming the shadow creature to the ground in its borrowed flesh. Pinned beneath Sarah's luminous form, the fiend thrashed and howled, spewing sulphurous curses in forgotten tongues. But it could not break free as the incandescent entity reached down to seize it by the throat. "Vile thing of evil, by the authority of all that is just and good, I banish you." The numinous being thundered with Sarah's vocal cords. "I cast you out, never to return. Be gone from this mortal plane." The demon let out one last, terrible screech of futile rage before its corporeal form exploded into a miasma of chthonic vapor. The crepuscular mist lingered for a moment, hissing its malice, before dissipating like acrid smoke on the chill wind. In the sudden, echoing silence left in its wake, Ethan rushed forward to catch Sarah as she crumpled from the air like a marionette with cut strings. He lowered her gently to the damp grass, smoothing tangled hair from her face as her eyelids fluttered open to reveal confused but blessedly human brown eyes. "Ethan? What happened?" she croaked, voice hoarse and body racked with involuntary shivers. Did I? Shhhh, he soothed, helping her to sit up and removing his coat to wrap around her shoulders. "It's over. We did it. You did it, Sarah. You were incredible. I've never seen anything like that." Sarah glanced around, taking in the aftermath of the battle and carnage that had erupted in what felt like a blink of an eye. What was that? That thing inside me? And the evil? Oh God. Ethan, what have we done? What have we unleashed? Ethan held her close as the magnitude of events crashed down upon them both. "I don't know," he admitted tremulously. "I don't know what that shining being was that chose you. but I think it may be the only reason we're still alive, and the world isn't in flames. As for the other, I pray to God it's been banished for good this time." He met her shell-shocked gaze, a wry smile touching his lips despite it all. "Guess that underground network I mentioned just gained a powerful new ally, eh?" Sarah huffed a strangled half-laugh as she allowed Ethan to help her to her feet on unsteady legs. "Yeah, I guess you could say that," she muttered, casting a last look over her shoulder at the ancient monoliths that had played host to primordial forces that night. "Something tells me we haven't heard the last from the cult of the Black Sun." Ethan's jaw clenched as he wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders and guided them toward the path leading out to the parking lot. "No, I imagine not. Evil of that magnitude seldom stays in the shadows for long." He glanced down at her, stormy eyes softening. "But it won't have to face the light alone next time." Sarah met his gaze, ashen but resolute as she drew his jacket tighter around herself. "No," she agreed quietly. "No, it won't." With one last look at the sepulchral silhouette of Stonehenge fading into the gloom behind them, the unlikely duo made their way out of that place of ancient secrets and arcane peril and into an uncertain future. But one thing was certain: Sarah's life and the world would never be the same. The scales had been irrevocably tipped, the veil between worlds torn asunder. And it would be up to an American grad student and a mysterious monster hunter to ensure the forces of darkness did not flood through that breach to drown the earth in a tide of blood and shadow. Their road would be long, winding, and fraught with untold dangers. But they would walk it together, for there was no other choice. The future of humanity itself hung in the balance. The Stonehenge sacrifice was only the beginning,